How did you first come to CSIS?
That's a funny story. As you know, we were booted out of office, and I had to find a place. And I liked Washington, so I didn't want to go back to New York and be primarily involved in New York life. And I knew that think tanks were places where people think about the kind of things that I had to think about when I was in the White House. So I went to several, and they were all very gracious. They asked me what I would like to do, and would I please present an outline of what I have in mind, and things of that sort. And then I came to CSIS, and I met our then president, who was being very gracious, and as you know, he's always very energetic and so forth. And he said, well, can I just show you around? And he showed me around, and showed me Jim Schlesinger's office, and he showed me Kissinger's office, and then he says, which one would you like to have, and so forth. And I said, are you offering me? He said, well, if you want to come, you have to have an office. And that settled it.
Yeah.
And I've been very happy at CSIS ever since then, and that's a long time ago.
My goodness, well, that's wonderful. You lived in a world of academia, but you also have lived in a world of policy. You've kept a foot in academia, but you've really anchored yourself in worlds of think tanks. Why is that?
I moved from academia and academic thinking while still in academia. That is to say, I was always motivated by the feeling that the Cold War was the unfinished part of the big war with Hitlerism, and the opponent was even more dangerous than Hitlerism. So by the late 50s and early 60s, my academic writing started veering towards policy recommendations. And that led to me being picked up by politicians who wanted to get something from me, advice, good speeches or something like that. And I became then, President Johnson called me in several times when I was working in the Policy Planning Council in the State Department. I took a leave of absence, and I was one-on-one with the President. And Hubert Humphrey had me as his chief foreign policy advisor during the campaign. So I entered that world in a kind of logical fashion, but I really saw myself as part of it. And when we lost the election in '68, I helped with David Rockefeller to create the Trilateral Commission, which was action-oriented. And that helped to prepare me for the job in the White House.
There was once a day when academics were involved actively in policy deliberations, but that really has in some sense ended, and it now seems to have migrated to think tanks. Have you seen that?
I agree. I think think tanks actually are a refinement on academics working on would-be policy issues in the top institutions. It democratized the process, it made it wider, and some of them are leaning this way or that way politically even. But by and large, they create an environment which in some respects, at least to me, is a simulation of real life policy making, where you try to assess what ought to be done and why. And if you're motivated, particularly as I was, by the desire to prevail, you have to think about it very seriously and all the time.
You were so lucky to have this opportunity to create the Brzezinski Institute on geostrategy. Let me ask you your vision of geostrategy. Why did you think that's an important name for this new institute?
First of all, it's not geopolitics, it's geostrategy. Geopolitics is descriptive, in a sense. Geostrategy is deriving from geographical realities and historical experience, certain guidelines, which have to be changed over time, because not all of those elements are static. Some do have a continuing influence, let's say geographical confines, historical experience. But both of them change. Technology changes geographical confines, and historical experience at some point begins to fade. For example, the European Union is a reaction to intra-European wars. And my feeling is that this is something which requires systematic analysis, continuous receptivity to the need for revision, and a certain coldness of judgment as to the fundamental question, how much violence has to be applied in the pursuit of what you consider to be vital objectives. So I think geostrategy kind of summarizes that.
May I just broaden this for a second? We live in an era where everybody talks about globalization, that the state is less important. We have non-state actors. What is your sense today of an international system, the role that structures, nation states play in an international system, and are they being weakened? Are they more important? Are they more central for strategy? How would you think about that question?
I have a vague sense that new forces are rising which constrain or diminish the ability of nation states, and especially democratic ones, to act effectively. And that's connected with one phenomenon which I call global political awakening, in which people are motivated all of a sudden very intensely and act politically on behalf of sometimes fanatical causes religiously or ethnically or otherwise. And this is one of the reasons why we haven't won any wars since Second World War, basically, except one, George Bush the first against Iraq. So that's one reason. Another reason is the change in the nature of weaponry. We elevated atomic weapons to a level in which they became non-usable. And yet behind them is the reality of total extinction. And ahead of us, there's the possibility that one day we could wake up, all of a sudden, without knowing it, that we have been disarmed, and we don't know by whom. And that could have calamitous consequences. So we're entering this era of uncertainty, which at the same time is being compounded by concern about the viability of our overall global financial system in a globalized world in which corruption and manipulation seems to be gaining momentum worldwide. Take a look at what is happening to Great Britain. Is it really an industrial society, or is it a society in which the major source of national income is corruption, freely exercised from a part of a major city, its own city? And then beyond that, the uncertainties connected with climatic change. All of that means that I think this new era that we're entering now is going to be one of enormous confusion and perplexity, maybe even anarchy.
You, in your life work, where you fashioned a strategy, mobilized American policy to bring an end to Bolshevism, you harnessed the optimism of democracy and the potential that it brought, working with others that weren't necessarily democratic states. Let me ask you to just reflect now. What is your sense about the capacity of democracies to deal with the kinds of problems that we're dealing with today in our era, in 2014?
Well, first of all, I am personally an optimist, simply in terms of personal life and style and so forth. So I want to sound optimistic, but I am perplexed about democracy's ability to deal with complexity. I mean, look, just as we are talking here, we have a major crisis looming in the Middle East and in Central Eastern Europe, Ukraine. What is the American public preoccupied with? Who wins the basketball championship? That's a democracy. The level of interest in global affairs is minimal. And it's not really much better in other countries. They're all preoccupied with themselves. And yet these large issues are looming and zooming in on us, and I'm not sure that democracies will be able to respond. Will the others respond better? Well, that's also problematical. Putin has become a dictator, yet he may be plunging Russia into an adventure from which it will find difficult to extricate itself and undermine the very system that he so triumphantly now thinks he's leading into bigger and bigger successes. Look at the Chinese. They want to develop successfully, and they have, but they have created in the process an elite system of massive corruption that makes even our corruption look smaller. So what is a good system these days? I'm not sure I know.
Are you optimistic about the wave of history with representative structures of government, that they'll ultimately prevail, or is this problem of politicians following, not leading, starting to become a bigger problem?
I think you're absolutely right. It is becoming a bigger problem. And also democracy as a reality has been with us for 250 years out of human history, known history of thousands of years. So it's really an epiphenomenon.
History shows a great deal more success with authoritarian governments, frankly, than democratic ones.
That's right, exactly. And this is why, we have to think very seriously in what, your center, which you lead, is going to be dealing, namely geostrategic choices. Can we at the same time ignore these realities that are confronting us and at the same time engage in renewed, very tough competition with Russia if Europe falters? And can we provoke the Chinese into more hostility towards us in the Far East and thrive at the same time, at a time when our society is very loath to undertake any sacrifices and is not motivated by any large central goals?
This is a good reason to create the Brzezinski Institute.
Maybe, as a last resort.
As an opportunity.
Yeah.
Americans are not good students of history.
That's right.
And we don't know geography. I'm
Absolutely
shocked.
Not.
And so it seems there's a unique opportunity to bring these two factors together in an analytic way, but yet an analytic way where there's still a vision about what's possible. The quality of analysis can help improve government.
That's right, and it's derived from some sort of implicit moral code, which, after all, we all need to be respecting if we're to succeed.
Do you feel that that's, these last 10, 15 years we've had this great alarm over terrorism. Do you think that that's undermined our kind of moral compass?
To some extent, and maybe because we were so eager to stamp it in a particularly effective, publicly effective way, jihadist terror. We forgot that the word jihadist means holy war for a large portion of mankind. So we sort of, I think, unintentionally stumbled into identification of terrorism, which is horror, ugliness personified, with, at the same time, intensely awakened religious sensitivities. That was a very debilitating, very negative connotation.
And I still remember a comment you made at one point when you were asked about the war on terrorism, and you said that makes no sense because terrorism's a tactic.
That's
and you said, I remember, that's like saying World War II was the war against Blitzkrieg.
Yes, exactly.
We haven't really defined the fundamentals in this struggle. Do you think we're there now?
No, I thought we might be nearer there because I was very impressed by Obama's thoughtfulness, especially in the early phases of his presidency. It's just that hasn't been translated into geostrategy.
Yeah. Well, I think this is an exciting reason for our having this opportunity. Zbig, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to chat with you about it. Well, I can't tell you how excited we are about this new future.
Well, thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.